Hello, it's Janice from Fleurs. Welcome back into the studio today. Today we are going to be making the Bear Paw On-Point Quilt, but I guess we should be calling this one the Bunny Paw On-Point because I am going to use this adorable fabric from Art Gallery Fabrics that's several years old from the Littlest collection, but it features little bunnies. And I think it is perfect to use with my Bear Paw On-Point quilt pattern because it, again, like I had mentioned in the last video, this is a really good one for using up like a larger print that doesn't make the best sense sometimes when you cut it up, because this features like a large central piece of fabric, an 8.5 inch square, and that way you can really get a big impact of the fabric on this one. So you can see me very professionally counting over to make that square. And then you need to cut up the little pieces for the paws. So I'm just kind of cutting through all of the fabric here. Of course, you get all of those instructions that you can see there in the top of how many pieces you need to cut to make your quilt. And honestly, preparing the fabric and cutting everything takes the longest amount of time for this project. Really, the quilt itself goes together pretty quickly. It makes really large blocks. They're like 28 inches or something whenever you complete them. And so I only need to make 4 to make a pretty generous sized quilt on this one. So I'm just cutting everything up that you need to cut. And it's just a nice kind of relaxing process. Cutting all of the squares. And once I have the feature fabric cut, I need to cut all of the other pieces for my supporting fabrics. And I've chosen a dark green and more of like a mint. And they are going to be in opposite squares, just for a little variation. And I also chose 2 different pinks that coordinated with my bunny fabrics for some of the other claw features of the fabrics. And I just wanted to mix it up a little bit. I really like using more than one kind of fabric in my process. And I think that it, also helps if you want to use up your stash to use more than one different kind of fabric. I think it adds interest to the quilt. And also you need smaller pieces then. You can use a variety and not need such large cuts of any one particular thing, which I'm always a big fan of. So I have 2 different greens going here. I have a vintage green that's that darker, more emerald color, and then I have this lighter mint color fabric that is also, I believe, a vintage piece. It's just a fat quarter. And then I have the 2 prints in the pink, and one you'll see is really cut up. So I usually just use whatever I've collected that I think works and that has the look that I want and gives that right vibe. And this is a really cute little baby quilt, so I was able to get away, I think, with a little bit more cutesy prints on this one. Right, so here's the piece. You can see that wherever it came from, sometimes I get fabrics just given to me, and they have little, they've been formerly loved. But, I think that that's really fun, and that's something that I love about quilting is using what you have and using fabrics from all over the place, not necessarily things that were bought together or even ever intended to go together. I think that's more in keeping with the tradition of quilting, is using what you have and using things from all over the place that create a unique look every single time. So there are all of my fabrics, and I'm ready to go cut the background. Now you do need quite a bit of background for this. I started out with this speckle for my background here, and I really like it. It's a great neutral. It has these little flecks of chocolatey brown on this tan background, and just something that has a little bit of interest in the background, but it is not too overpowering. It doesn't really draw the attention, and I think that was perfect for this quilt because it let my smaller little tonal prints in the pink and the green work together really well, and then also highlighted the white base background of my bunny print, which I think, really showed everything off. So you need quite a few squares here for the background. And I'm just cutting all of that up and getting it ready, setting everything aside. And then we're going to do the really big pieces. And that's why you need a large piece for the background of this, because it does turn out to be a really large square. And so you do need some larger pieces so that you have enough to cut. Because we are going to make 15-inch blocks for this and then subcut them to make triangles. And then that is what allows us to set the paw on point. So it actually spins the block by adding that extra bit in the corners. So you can again see my very technical counting skills using my finger there. Don't overthink it. And then I'm just making sure that it's square, because once you cut it on the bias, then you've kind of done it. And this is also the point where I realize I'm not getting enough out of this piece of fabric for what I really need to do. So I'm kind of just, tapping my fingers, thinking, and then I need to go, I just forge ahead. I'm just going to cut it on the diagonal, and then I'm going to find something else in my stash to complete the other 2 blocks. And I think about the gray, it's too much, so I find this beautiful daisy print, and that's going to work as my other piece of background. And now I finally have everything. I need to just decide what goes with what. So I put the lighter ones with the daisy print fabric background, and then I'm going to put the darker ones with that speckle. And I'm going to get a little bit of contrast in my blocks, but not too much. And now it is time to draw the diagonals on the back of a whole bunch of these blocks. And we are going to make 2 at a time half square triangles using our feature fabric and the colored fabrics and our background fabrics to get all of the little points and claws that we need to put the block together. So I'm just doing that. And then I am pairing things up and trying to make sure to not mix up the backgrounds with what I wanted. And I do pin here on either side of the line just to keep my pieces from wiggling around while I'm sewing them all together. And then I'm going to pop onto my machine and chain piece. So I'm going to sew down the one side of the line, 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to do a whole bunch of them, just do it all in a big batch. And then I'm going to flip it around and go on the other side. I'm going to cut them all loose, and I'm going to cut them open right on the line. You can use your ruler, but I find that I do a little bit better job just following the line with my blade than using the ruler. And then take a big stack over there and press everybody opened. Always press to the dark side. Now we have to trim. So I'm using my ruler and I'm putting that 45-degree line right on the center of my block and trimming off anything that hangs over the excess until you get a really nice, crisp and clean block with that 45-degree line going right through the diagonal center. And this would be great if I had one of those little rotating table things, but I don't, so I just manually spin mine around. And then I used a smaller grid, which made it a lot easier, and I could stand closer to my table. I'm not sure why I didn't do that the first time, but whatever. So I finally did it, better late than never, and got them all trimmed up. You can see the trimmings, and they go right in the garbage can. Okay. Now I am using my pattern to reference how I need to lay everything out. And I'm starting with that large and very satisfying central block. And then I am putting my little accent corners on. And this is the darker of the 2 blocks. And you just want to make sure that you get all your cute little directional prints facing the way that you want them while you're laying everything out. Of course, if you're using something that's non-directional, then you don't need to fuss as much. But if you're using something that's directional, you may not want like upside down bunnies. So you might want to spend a few minutes working on that. and I'm just laying everything out. And it's really satisfying. They come together so quickly, these blocks, that honestly the longest part is cutting up the fabric and trimming all of those half square triangles. I really don't like trimming half square triangles. Maybe you're in that camp with me, but you have to get over it if you're going to quilt, because they're just such a part of so many designs that you just have to power through. You just have to power through it and quilt all those, or trim them all, so you can quilt and you can make the quilt. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, fussing about. Anyway, I finally get it all laid out the way that I want it. And then it is so satisfying to get this onto the machine and sew it up. Now, here we go. The nice dark. I love that dark green with the pink. Very cute. All right, here we go. Taking the pattern with me just in case I get mixed up, getting some things out of my way, and settling in to get sewing. I recommend starting on this with putting a couple of the pieces together that you need to be larger to attach to that central square. So that's what I'm starting with. I'm putting those together and I'm just doing that chain piecing. Then I'm going to cut them off and lay them back out so that I don't get distracted and confused, because that happens to me a lot. Oh, I'm finger pressing open the claws because I don't want to take it over and bother pressing, but I do want them to line up nicely. So I'm taking that little time to finger press. So I'm just pressing the crease open with my finger and making everything nice and flat again. And then I am moving on to my first row, and it's just overlapping one to the next and sewing down the correct side so that you're not spinning your pieces around. But the nice thing is, in the pattern, I have included a diagram that shows you which things you should sew first, and it keeps it laid out for you so that if you're like me and you distract easily and you love to get turned around when you're making a project, you have a picture that you can reference really quickly, like, am I still putting things where they need to go? Super, I can press on. So getting that first row, and then I'm going to do the second row, which is so fun to use a larger print in the center of these blocks. I often struggle finding patterns where I want to use like a big print or something with a lot of white space, because when you cut them up, they sometimes don't look like anything anymore. And I don't always want to use those for backing fabrics either. So I'm loving this block because you can use a big feature. And in the other example that I made, and the one that I made for We Like Sewing magazine, I used a cyanotype print that I created. And I really love that too. So if you're somebody that likes to dye your own fabric, or you like to do ink, or maybe you have like a really cool cross stitch sampler or vintage hanky or something else like that that you want to feature, I think this pattern really lends itself well to showing that off. And I think it's hard to find, large quilt blocks that show off like large prints, or something that you don't necessarily want to cut down because it loses that meaning. So I'm really loving the Bear Paw On-Point for that. And, now that I mention that, I love the idea of using like a vintage hanky as the center of one of these. That would be just phenomenally pretty, and such a great way to show off those collections. I love to go to thrift stores and to, flea markets and antique shops and find all of those vintage fabrics, but then what do you do with it? At some point you need to make something out of it. So this might be a good solution. If you're somebody like me and you tend to hoard those things, let's get them out there. Let's create with them. This could be a great option. I'm thinking it would be. Anyway, so then I am doing just putting the rows together. You end up with 4 rows, 2 small rows that you need to join together like I'm doing here, and then that big center row and another small row to cap it off, and just put everything on top of each other. I'm not pinning here. I'm not a big pinner if I think I can get away with it. I am taking the time to nest those seams as I go and making sure that they do lock together and line up. So that's just a personal preference. If you prefer to pin, I would do that here. just to make sure that you're getting those nice crisp lines in the sections that you want them to be in, and lining up those pieces. Or if you're like me and you're okay to just have it be, pretty good. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be good. It's fine to just finger press those seams together and nest them as you're working, which by that I mean like finding the spot where the seam is raised and you can depress the other seam into it. So you just kind of like lock them together using the fold, the little ever so slight layer change of the fold to nest them together. And we're almost done putting this block together. So we've got all of our rows. Now we have a nice big paw. Yay, celebrate. And then we've got to put our big background pieces on. These are those giant triangles that we created. And I'm just kind of eyeballing the center. You could be really precise. You could measure. You could take it over to the iron and fold a crease down the center. And sometimes I do that if I feel like I really need to be precise. But this is kind of a forgiving block, so I don't think you need to be as precise on this. I'm just making sure that it looks centered and that it overlaps similarly on both sides. So the corners will come off on either side, and then it's that little extra bit that gives you a seam allowance at the edges of your block there. So I'm just smoothing everything out, and I am pinning in a few spots. You do not want your bias cut triangle to wibble and wobble all over the place while you're sewing. So this is a good time to pin, even if you're not really a pinner. I would recommend it in this particular application. So I am just going to do the opposite side, and then you lay it open, take those pins out, and I'm going to do the other two remaining sides. Very nearly done. I love it. So classic and cute. Again, making sure that it's overlapping the same on either side, pinning in the center, and then I'm pinning toward the ends, and just making sure that as I work that it is pretty even. It doesn't need to be 100%, but you don't want one corner way off of the edge and one corner, barely touching. So we need that little area of seam allowance off of either side to be able to put it together properly at the end. I think this is a really fun baby quilt. It could be a very great throw quilt. I really think it could be good for Christmas fabrics too. This would be so darling for a big feature Christmas print. And comes together so quickly. Honestly, did this filming the entire thing and making all 4 of the blocks for this throw in part of a day. Now, I sew all the time, so take that with a grain of salt. If you don't sew all the time, it might take you longer. But I was able to make 4 blocks yesterday in the better part of the morning and the afternoon, and then get it all put together. So this is one day, this take of stuff. Obviously, I've sped it up here for you. You wouldn't want to spend an entire day watching me put together a quilt. You need to get out there and quilt your own. But, it can be done. I think this is a great pattern. It's really satisfying because the blocks are so large. Anyway, here's the second version with a little bit lighter colors and the daisy print background. And I've changed some camera angles so you can watch me work from a few different angles if you're curious about how I get it all put together. But, it's just following the directions, following the diagram. Honestly, it is really simple. this quilt. So if you're new-ish to quilting, or you just want something that, like I said, you can do in a day, and get it together, maybe have a bunch of little new babies that you're going to be welcoming in the new year, or you want to make people some Christmas quilts. I mean, I hope they're special if you're going to make them special quilts, but I'm sure that they are. Anyway, I would check on that. You wouldn't want somebody to get a quilt that doesn't appreciate it. There's still a lot of work, and depending on how much money you spend on your fabric, which we all know can be gobs and gobs, you might have a lot in it. Anyway, you be the judge of that one. But here I am just putting the rows together, and I sometimes just leave my walking foot on. I know you're probably not supposed to do that, but again, I think it helps. It feeds it through there. It has those extra feet on the top there. I just like working with it. Sometimes it's just laziness. If I know I'm going to be finishing this one up, why bother unscrewing the little thing just to put it back on? Anyway, so I'm nearly done, even with this second version. And then you are going to get to see what it looks like all spread out on my floor, which is my design wall. And very nearly done here. So you can see me taking a little bit of time to make sure everything lines up and is nested together. Again, don't overdo it. You can see I'm using that little tiny fold and just making sure that they nest and that they're lined up, and I'm pressing things open with my fingers as I work in lieu of pins. But, if you don't like that, you can use pins. And then I've got the second version, and I just need to put the background pieces on it. So you can see here a little bit my strategy. It's just working from the center out and pinning, and doing the opposite side, working from the center out and pinning, and then just attaching those down together, making sure that the corners hang over a little bit so I'm getting that seam allowance. I do one side, and then I rotate and I do the opposite side, and then I open it up and I do the remaining two sides. If you have any questions about the pattern, you can feel free to email me. My email address is on the pattern. I'm also on Instagram. That's a great place to reach out. You can use the hashtag Bear Paw On-Point Quilt, and I'm at LaRue de Fleurs, which will come up at the end of the video, and as well as, being linked on all the pages there. Here it is. Gorgeous. Now I've done 2 more so that we have 4 in total, 1 in the darker and 1 in the lighter. And we are almost done. Isn't it a gorgeous big quilt? There are the rows, and then we combine the rows and we get a nice throw quilt. So beautiful. I really love the colors on this. It's sweet and sophisticated at the same time, and looking at this color combination is also giving me Christmas vibes. So thank you for joining me today, friends. I really appreciated all of the support, and if you want to purchase the pattern, you can find that in my Etsy shop, laruedefleurs.etsy.com. Thanks again, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.